What if I told you that in the heart of Burkina Faso, one of the richest men on earth, Bill Gates, stood speechless? No script. No comeback. Just silence. It happened at the Africa Digital Future Forum. A room full of world leaders, tech giants, and flashing cameras. And then Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped up. No fancy slides. No polished smile. Just truth, raw, bold, and impossible to ignore. In less than 10 minutes, he flipped the script. Gates came to lead the conversation. But Traoré took the mic, and the moment. What he said. It changed everything. And yes, Gates never saw it coming. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global powers, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story, in its own voice, if you've ever seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes, then this story is yours too. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand with us. Together, we are not just watching a movement that we are becoming it. This is more than politics, that it's a quiet storm rising, and those whispers, they're turning into a roar the world can no longer ignore. And that's where the story really begins. When Bill Gates landed in Ouagadougou, the energy was calm, calculated, almost predictable. This was familiar ground for him, another forum, another keynote, another chance to reinforce his legacy as the world's benevolent tech giant. The banners read Africa Digital Future, and the message was clear: innovation was coming, backed by the West. He walked into the hall with ease. Smiles, cameras, polite nods. His entourage moved like a well-oiled machine. The front rows were filled with ministers, CEOs, and NGO reps, all eyes were on him. And as he took the stage, nothing seemed out of place. His voice carried the weight of certainty. Africa, he said, is on the brink of a digital transformation. And we're here to help shape that journey. He spoke of investment, infrastructure, connectivity. He even cracked a small joke about solar-powered tablets. The room responded with polite laughter. It felt like a done deal. But not everyone was clapping. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat still. His face unreadable. His eyes fixed on Gates, not with admiration, but with quiet calculation. Because he knew something no one else in that room seemed willing to say out loud: this wasn't just a speech. It was a pitch. A soft sell for influence wrapped in warm words and billion-dollar promises. And behind every promise, there was a cost. Not just in currency, but in control. In data. In destiny. What Gates didn't expect was what would come next. Because Traoré wasn't going to let this stage become another echo chamber, he was about to use it to light a fuse. And then, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood up. No fanfare. No media team fixing his collar. No polished slideshow waiting behind him. Just a soldier, in uniform, walking calmly to the podium, under the full glare of international attention. He adjusted the mic. His voice was low, steady. At first, it sounded like any formal response. A thank you to the organizers. A nod to the importance of dialogue. But then came the turn, subtle at first, then sharp. We are grateful, he said, for the global interest in Africa's digital future. But let us not confuse interest with ownership. The room tensed. Faces shifted. Gates blinked but didn't move. Captain Ibrahim Traoré continued, only now, the warmth was gone. Every day, we hear about digital transformation. About networks and platforms and promises. But who owns the code? Who stores our data? Who controls the servers where our children's futures are being written? You could hear the silence settle across the hall like dust. Delegates leaned forward. Some glanced nervously at Gates. Traore wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness made every word hit harder. We are not against technology, he added. We are against dependency. Africa is not a testing ground for foreign dreams. It is the birthplace of its own. A pause. Then he looked straight at Gates. If control lies with those who write the code, then tell me, where do Africans stand? It wasn't just a question. It was an indictment. Of systems. Of motives. Of the quiet power plays hiding behind the language of innovation. And in that moment, Traore wasn't just speaking for Burkina Faso, that he was speaking for every country that had been told to say thank you, while signing away its sovereignty. The mood had changed. The room wasn't Gates anymore. It belonged to the captain, and no one, not even the billionaire on the front row, could ignore it. And then came the shift no one was prepared for. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What he did next was far more powerful. He reframed the entire conversation. This isn't just about digital access, he said, eyes scanning the crowd. It's about digital power. Suddenly, this wasn't a polite discussion anymore. It was a reckoning. He began to lay out the hidden costs behind the digital partnerships so often praised by the West. Yes, Gates Foundation brought tools. But at what price? Traore listed them, not in dollars, but in control. Our data, he said, flows out of our borders. Stored on foreign servers. Analyzed by foreign companies. Sold without our consent. Used without our knowledge. And what do we get in return? A mobile app? Gasps spread across the room. A few officials shifted uncomfortably. Gates remained still, but his jaw had tightened. Cameras kept rolling. We've been told this is inclusion, Traore continued. That this is progress. But if we cannot see the source code, if we cannot decide what's done with our people's information, then what we've entered is not inclusion. It's surveillance. With a smile. The room wasn't clapping anymore. Traore gave examples. How foreign-funded health apps collected biometric data, how educational platforms gathered voice recordings of children, how agricultural tools tracked land use in real time. All, he said, under the banner of development. But none under African control. He didn't accuse Gates directly. But every word he spoke unwrapped another layer of discomfort. The kind that makes billionaires squirm in their seats, not because they're under attack, but because the truth is suddenly louder than their narrative. Then came the question that stopped even the translators. If Africa must always ask permission to access its own future, then whose future are we really building? No one had an answer. No one even tried. The silence in the room was no longer polite. It was loaded. Heavy. A silence filled with the weight of realization. Traore had just exposed the machinery beneath the mission statements. And here's the most shocking part, he wasn't angry. He wasn't theatrical. He was calm, composed. Devastatingly precise. That's what made it hit harder. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just challenge a tech billionaire. He challenged the assumption that Africa should be led, not listened to. And in that single moment, the power in the room shifted. The billionaire had spoken. But now, the captain had answered. And then, just like that, the room froze. For a man used to commanding stages around the world, Bill Gates had no words. His hands, usually moving with confidence, sat still on his lap. His face, known for calm optimism, had gone blank. Not defensive. Not amused. Just, stunned. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just spoken, he had exposed. And the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. The cameras didn't miss a second. Every broadcaster, every journalist, every phone in the audience captured the moment. One of the world's most powerful men, publicly silenced, not by aggression, but by clarity and Traore. He didn't bask in the reaction. He simply stood firm, letting the weight of his words settle into the room like a storm cloud before the rain. "We cannot rent sovereignty," he said quietly. "We either own our future or we don't." That was the line that hit hardest. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Hashtags began trending, hashtag Traore speaks, hashtag digital independence, hashtag Gates silenced. News anchors scrambled for footage. Analysts stumbled to explain. In cities across Africa, youth groups and tech hubs replayed the clip like a war cry. Here was something they hadn't seen before, a head of state not begging for investment, but demanding respect. On stage, Traore remained composed. He wasn't theatrical. He didn't point fingers or raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. His truth, undeniable. Even those who disagreed with him couldn't look away. Something had shifted. Something big. People expected a summit about progress. They got a confrontation about power. They expected polite exchange. They witnessed ideological rupture. Gates, to his credit, didn't interrupt. He sat in the front row, watching, perhaps realizing, in real time, that his usual narrative no longer landed the same. Not here. Not in Burkina Faso. Not with this captain. And what made it unforgettable wasn't just that Traore challenged Gates. It was how he did it. Without insult. Without bravado. Just with the quiet, cutting precision of someone who knew exactly what was at stake, and refused to blink. That's what made it echo. Because it wasn't just one man against another. It was a voice that had been muted for too long, finally speaking, and being heard. And for that moment, in that hall, the world leaned in, not to hear Gates, but to listen, truly listen, to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. And when the session ended, there were no handshakes. No press conferences. No glossy joint announcements. Bill Gates quietly exited the hall, surrounded by his team. No words to the cameras. No parting smiles. Just silence, the kind that lingers when something doesn't go to plan. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, on the other hand, didn't leave through the back. He walked through the crowd. People reached for him. Some clapped. Others just stared. Because what he had said wasn't just brave, it was unprecedented. Not many leaders challenge power like that. Fewer do it in public. Almost none do it in front of the very face of that power. But Traoré wasn't trying to make a scene. He was making a point. That Africa is done with silence. That digital sovereignty isn't a luxury, it's survival. That the continent doesn't need billionaires to give it permission to think, to speak, or to build. The days that followed were proof of the moment's impact. Across social media, young Africans quoted him. Universities played clips of his speech in lectures. Tech collectives debated infrastructure, ownership, and freedom in ways they never had before. In cafes, offices, and street corners, people were saying his name, not as a politician, but as a symbol. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had become something else. He wasn't just the president of Burkina Faso. He was the voice of a generation tired of being told what development should look like. Tired of being treated as a market, not as a partner. Tired of being listened to only when echoing foreign plans. His words had cracked something. And once cracked, the silence never fully returns. No, there were no contracts signed that day. No mouse. No ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But a message had been carved into the consciousness of a continent: Africa will not be programmed. It will code its own path. And perhaps that was Traoré's greatest achievement, not silencing a billionaire, but waking up a people. Because leadership isn't always about policy. Sometimes, it's about posture. The refusal to bend. The courage to speak. The fire to say no, and the wisdom to say why. That's what echoed beyond the forum walls. That's what stayed with people. And that's why, long after the stage was cleared, and the microphones shut off, the world still remembered that moment. The moment the richest man in the room went silent, and the captain, calm and clear, rewrote the script. Conclusion: 500 words. Some moments don't need explosions to be historic. Sometimes, all it takes is one man standing tall, and refusing to kneel. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't walk into that forum to entertain or impress. He didn't wear a tailored suit. He didn't bring slides or sponsors. What he brought was rarer: clarity, purpose, conviction. In a world where most leaders trade truth for diplomacy, where speeches are scripted to avoid offense, he chose a different path. He chose honesty. And it was that honesty that shook the room. No insults. No outrage. Just questions, powerful, uncomfortable questions. The kind that don't make headlines, but make history. When Bill Gates sat in silence, it wasn't because he was defeated. It was because he had been disarmed. Not by hostility, but by something stronger, a leader who knew exactly what his people deserved, and who wasn't afraid to say it out loud. A man who understood that true progress must come from within, not be imported with strings attached. That day, the story wasn't about technology. It wasn't even about politics. It was about dignity. About who gets to shape the future, and who gets left out of it. It was about ownership. Not just of resources or data, but of voice. And for the first time in a long time, that voice wasn't filtered through foreign NGOs, think tanks, or development partners. It came straight from the source. From Ouagadougou, to Nairobi, to Johannesburg, and far beyond, young Africans heard that voice. They didn't just listen. They felt it. And many, for the first time, realized that standing up to power wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Captain Ibrahim Traoré reminded them that leadership isn't granted by wealth, or backed by foundations, or measured in likes. It's something else. Something deeper. Leadership is refusing to sell your people's future, no matter how good the deal looks on paper. He showed the world that you can be a small country, but still speak with the weight of a continent. That you can come from a place often ignored, and still command the silence of the powerful. That you don't need permission to protect what is yours. What happened in that hall wasn't a moment of humiliation. It was a moment of awakening. Not just for Africa, but for anyone who has ever been told they are too small to matter. Too poor to lead. Too weak to resist. Because when one voice dares to challenge a system, others follow. And so, this isn't just a story about Burkina Faso, but it's a story about reclaiming the right to speak.to decide.to lead. And if you're still watching, still listening, then maybe, just maybe, this story is yours too. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against the giants of this world. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story, not in borrowed voices, but in its own bold, unshaken words. If you've seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt, even for a moment, that something is changing, then this story is yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not just to support, but to walk with us. Because this isn't just a broadcast. It's a movement. A quiet storm rising from the south. And the whispers? They're no longer whispers. They're turning into thunder. Let the world hear it. Africa is speaking, and this time, it will not be silenced. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his quiet confrontation with Bill Gates is more than just a viral moment. It is a lesson in power, dignity, and the importance of owning one's narrative. In a world increasingly dominated by soft influence, data diplomacy, and philanthropic empires, this story reminds us that not all help is harmless, and not every promise of progress comes without a price. The lesson here is clear: true development cannot be built on dependency. For too long, Africa has been treated as a recipient, not a partner, a continent spoken for, not spoken to. Captain Traoré showed us that leadership isn't about how loud you speak, how rich you are, or how many foundations back your words. It's about knowing what your people need, and having the courage to protect it, even when doing so puts you in direct opposition with global powers. He didn't demand respect through anger or threats. He earned it through calm, clarity, and conviction. That alone is a powerful reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands still, and speaks the truth without flinching. This story also teaches us about the cost of silence. The silence of those who accept things as they are. The silence of leaders who fear offending their donors. The silence of people who've been taught to say yes, even when they want to say no. Traoré broke that silence. And when he did, he gave others permission to do the same. That's the kind of leadership the world needs, the kind that inspires more voices, not just more applause. Finally, the lesson isn't just political. It's personal. It's about recognizing when something offered as a gift is actually a leash. It's about asking who benefits from the systems we're told are inevitable. It's about knowing that true sovereignty, whether national, digital, or moral, must be defended, even quietly, even alone. And in the end, it's about remembering that sometimes, one voice is enough to start a storm. The comment section beneath this video lit up like wildfire. For many viewers, especially across the African continent, this was more than just a speech. It was a moment of pride, of awakening, of long overdue representation. One user wrote that Captain Ibrahim Traoré had spoken the words we've been waiting decades to hear, while another simply stated, "This is what leadership looks like, not in suits, but in truth." Viewers praised the captain's calm delivery, his sharp intellect, and above all, his unshakable commitment to African sovereignty. People didn't just applaud his defiance, they resonated with it. They felt seen. Many young Africans, especially those in the tech and academic sectors, commented on how Traoré's message gave voice to concerns they had long held in silence. One comment read, "We've been building, coding, creating, but always on systems we don't control." For once, someone stood up and said it out loud. The story gave rise to conversations about digital independence, about the ethics of foreign aid, and about the dangers of hidden influence wrapped in philanthropy. Some said it was the first time they saw a head of state challenge the West without bitterness, just facts. Outside Africa, too, the reaction was loud. From the Caribbean to South America to parts of Asia, people recognized parallels in their own country's struggles. Captain Traoré just spoke for all of us, a Brazilian viewer wrote. Same script, different stage. Meanwhile, a European viewer admitted, "It's rare to hear truth spoken with such grace. I didn't expect to agree, but I did." The message cut across borders and ideologies. What mattered wasn't where you were from, but whether you believed in dignity over dependency. And while some dissenting voices tried to frame Traoré's stance as anti-progress or anti-West, the overwhelming majority of comments pushed back, firmly. Challenging control isn't rejecting cooperation, one user responded. It's demanding respect. That's the difference. Others added that what Traore did wasn't just brave, it was necessary. This video, one commenter concluded, needs to be played in every classroom in Africa. By the end, it was clear, this wasn't just a moment on stage. But of comments didn't stop. As the video reached more corners of the world, people continued to pour in, not just to praise Captain Ibrahim Traoré, but to reflect on what his stance meant for the future of global relations. One viewer, a Kenyan woman, wrote, "I cried. Not out of sadness, but because I felt powerful for the first time watching an African leader speak without fear." Another woman from Senegal said, "My children watched this beside me. They asked, 'Mom, is he really our president?' And I said, 'He speaks like one.'" Women across the continent especially connected to Traoré's quiet strength. In a digital space often filled with shouting and division, his calm tone and sharp reasoning felt revolutionary. He didn't scream. He didn't insult. But his words hit like thunder, one comment read. Others noted that such poise under pressure is rare and powerful. "It reminded me of Thomas Sankara," one viewer added, "but modern, digital, and global." Some even shared how they had never followed politics until now. "I used to scroll past this kind of content," one young woman admitted, "but today, I stopped. I watched every second. And I subscribed, because this isn't just content. It's courage." In that moment, it wasn't about speeches or headlines anymore. It was about connection, between generations, between nations, between those who still believe that Africa's voice can be more than a whisper. It can be a roar.